What is going on, League of Leaders? Welcome to Leadership Live. I have a question for you. What do you do when the smartest person in the room becomes the biggest problem in the room? You call our guest today, Greg Witz. Now, for over 30 years, Fortune 500 leadership teams have called him, advisors to the White House have called him, CEOs whose brilliance turned into volatility, they've called him too. He built the MRPI 360 assessment. He wrote the book. He hosts the Better Human podcast. But here's what I love most about Greg. His mission hasn't changed in 3 decades. Just making better humans. That's what he does. He doesn't teach leaders to be nicer. He teaches them to be precise. Greg Witz, welcome.
How you doing, Donnie?
Welcome to Leadership Live. I want to know, before we jump in, there's this term. I've been looking at all of your stuff, and it's like got my brain buzzing. Greg Witz, what is behavioral precision?
Great question, and what a question to open up with. But simply put, behavior could be learned, developed, and intentional. You know, I think what we tend to do as people is we think behavior is this mystic thing, right? Which is, I just am who I am. And when we turn to the world of psychology, it actually gives us the tools and the frameworks to be precise in my communication, in my delivery, in my conflict management, in my emotional intelligence. And in fact, we could talk a little bit about emotional intelligence today as well. But people have this sort of perception that you're born a great leader, a great communicator. You're born with the ability to regulate your nervous system and your emotions. And the truth to it is none of that is innate. We are all, it is learned, right? So effective communication could be learned. There's a process for it. You know, leadership, it's learned. There's a process for it. So that's kind of what it means.
I love that. Now, so you've been around, you were born, bring us through your national journey there. I don't know if Popeye the Sailor Man was in any of those places, but when you said, I am what I am, it's like, nope, we're not Popeye the Sailor Man. We get to learn who we are. Yeah, take us through your national journey. Tell us, like, you started where and where are you now?
I grew up in South Africa, Johannesburg, which for people that don't know, it's probably one of the most dangerous places in the world. And at the same token, one of the most beautiful places in the world. But we left when I was 10 years old and moved to Canada, which was a little bit of a shock. You know, human beings don't deal with change well on a good day, and shifting your entire life. And I was actually thinking about this the other day, how much challenge and change I went through at sort of a young age of 10 and 11, you know, redeveloping friends, redeveloping and figuring out how to sort of operate socially, trying to find my place, find my connection, right? And from there, about 5 years ago, my family and we came down to Costa Rica for a working vacation during the pandemic. And, we were supposed to do 2 months. I moved the team down here. We set up the studio, and we were just gunning away and met all these expats and people and Costa Ricans. And I looked at my wife. I said, why don't we extend? And she was like, cool. So fast forward this conversation. We're supposed to leave. My mother is down here. She's here visiting us for the last week that we're supposed to be here. And she looks at me and she's like, what are you doing? She's like, you got to come home. She's like, you got a business, you got a dog, right? You've got a nanny. Like, you got to come home. So I was like, you're right. So we packed everything up. We flew to Florida, where we had a layover. And we were sitting in Miami. We landed Friday. We're supposed to fly out Sunday, and it was Saturday. And I looked at my wife and I said, how do you feel about canceling our flights home and flying back to Costa Rica? And she said, let's do it. And before she finished the sentence, I canceled the flights, booked new flights, flew back here, right? And the house that we were renting before, who I'm very good friends with today, his name is Juan Carlos, I called him up. I'm like, hey, bro, I need the lockbox code. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm back in Costa Rica. I'm standing in the driveway with 2 kids' luggages, and I need to get in the house.
Oh, my goodness.
And from that 6-month extension, we decided to make this our primary residence. And it was probably one of the best decisions we ever made. You know, raising the kids here has been an incredible experience. And I think they've benefited, again, tremendously for that.
Wow. Here's my question. has it made you a better human?
1000%, 1000%. I talk to a lot of people about this, right? I think in North America, it's very hard for us to separate the forest from the trees when we're in the rat race, right? It's
Yeah.
it's it's just this is normal life, right? And being down here, there's a different way of living. And if anyone knows anything about the blue zones, right? Costa Rica is a blue zone.
Hmm.
And in fact, there's a great documentary on Netflix called Blue Zones, which talks
Hmm.
about the 5 different blue zones around the world.
Yes.
And the guy that came up with the whole concept of blue zones, he went and he wanted to see, even though we're in different regions and in different places around the world, what are the commonalities to longevity? And there were 9 aspects or 9 categories that contributed to longevity. The number one thing that contributes to longevity is social connection,
Mm.
relationships, laughing, playing, being in a community. And that was what Costa Rica brought for me. In a lot of cases, reminded me of growing up in South Africa, right? Where, it is about open doors and people at the house and hanging out and breaking bread together and
Mm.
laughing and playing and being outside. So, it might have been a little more affecting on my business, right? Because I'm not in that intense hustle and grinding sort of mode as I used to be in North America. Not that we don't hustle as much as we should, but it is about stopping and smelling the roses. And that's what
Yeah.
Costa Rica's brought for me.
Yeah. I call it leisurely hustle. And
I like that.
I mean, we still have intention. We still have purpose. We're still moving
1000%.
forward. And this is a part of it. Like it's more of a holistic. I'm really glad I asked this question. First off, because I find tremendous courage when people are willing to look at life as it's been given to them and then still take like a different route because they realize this is what we want. I actually talk to a lot of leaders, Greg, that are they're the one dayers, right? And I'm wondering if you can talk to the one dayers. And I'm not saying that your way is the exact way, but I like maybe some of these people do want this now,
Mhm.
and like make it. Was it simple? Like you just mentioned it was a decision. Like how did you jump
Yeah.
from this to that?
Yeah. I listen, so I'm a massive believer in decisions and actions, right? I think I was once taught this. We've all heard of the concept of law of attraction,
Mm.
right? So what we put into the universe and what we sort of manifest and what we focus on and what we think about is what the universe will give us, right? There was that
Mm.
great book called The Secret and the movie called The Secret, which was a very sort of produced, animated movie about sort of, if you want to drive the Ferrari, just wish for the Ferrari. And Dr. Joe Vitale, who was actually in the movie The Secret, I had him on my podcast, and he says, Greg, law of attraction only works with law of GOYA, GOYA. And I was like, what is that? He was like, get off your ass. And I was like, that makes total sense. He was like, listen, if you want to sit on the couch and wish to be successful and wish to be healthy, like good luck to you. You got to get off your ass and go do something about that, right?
Yes.
But listen, it was not an easy decision. I mean, when we moved here, the decision in itself was easy. The follow up and what we had to then sort of execute and put in place
Mhm.
to make this a home, to build the community, to be part of the community, that took a lot of law of Goya, right? I had to sort of take action to that. But for people that are sort of interested, I think this is what the pandemic brought for us. Some people got crushed in the pandemic because, it was devastating. And then others saw this as a huge opportunity, which is like, things can change and things can shift. If you asked me 10 years ago, if you said, hey, Greg, would you ever move to Costa Rica? I would have said, that's for hippies. All right. That's, for hippies that want to come and do ayahuasca retreats and, visualize and release their trauma. Right. But when we did it, I knew the decision was staying in Canada during the pandemic was not the right decision. Like we had to leave. And we
Mm.
were actually planning on coming to the US. And just in the 11th hour, just logistically, the US wasn't working out. And we were going to go to California, and then we're thinking Florida, and then maybe Texas. And, it was just back and forth. And my wife said to me in the 11th hour, she's like, why don't we just go to Costa Rica for 2 months? And then we'll sort of figure it out. We could go to the US after that. And I was
Mhm.
like, well, if you could find the house that we need, because we're moving the team and the studio, so we needed like, a house that could host everyone. And she spun the computer around and she's like, there. I'm like, okay, book it. And again, for me, back to decision making, right? The easiest part is to make the decision. It's then the follow up and the execution that we have to have some strategy and planning and
Mhm.
organization and stuff for. But Costa Rica is a digital nomad place. There's a
Mhm.
digital tax exemption here. Um, where I am in Costa Rica is in a town called Playa del Coco. So we're about 25 minutes from the Liberia airport. You could end up in Costa Rica, like you've been to Costa Rica, when you're in like 3-4 hours in the middle of the jungle. Like it's quite sort of remote. So where we
Mhm.
are, I like to think about like we're kind of like in a gated community in Florida, right?
Yep. Okay.
We have we have paved roads, we have access. We're doing, and I travel a lot. I mean, the big thing that this brought was if we are going to be here, I'm going to have to start traveling a lot more for clients. And I mean, I just got back from a 6-week tour from the U.S. and Canada with training and coaching, and it was tiring. I mean, it's taxing to travel like that,
Mm.
but it is worth it to have the kids being raised here.
Yeah.
My wife loves it. I love the community, and back to it. I think I'm a better human for being here. I'm more chilled, I'm a pretty
Yeah.
intense
Yeah.
personality, so this brings
Yeah.
my
No.
my zen to a natural level.
I think it fits you. It is interesting. I think I've heard it said if you make the big decisions, get those out of your way, then life becomes
Yeah,
about making all the little decisions that support that. And this has put you on a track. I want to switch to places where maybe things are off track because that's what you help fix, right? Is people who are going off track. So before the White House, before Fortune 500, who
yeah.
was the leader that you watched derail and what did it cost?
My
First
father,
leader.
right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Talk
my
to me.
father was the one that started the company. I needed a summer job 30 years ago, and I found myself having to be forced to go work at my father's company because my mother said, "Listen, you've got two choices: get a job or go back to school." And I was quick on the draw. I was like, "I'll get a job." And she's like, "Perfect. You have an interview?" I was like, "Oh, no." And she's like, "Great. Until you have an interview and you've got something lined up, you're going to go and work for your father," who was not welcoming. All right, this was not nepotism. This was like, you are not welcome here. I do not want you here. You are going to F up my business. The only reason you're here is because of your mother. And my father, who I described like a Steve Jobs personality, a brilliant, brilliant man, but extremely volatile, right? And
Mm,
on a good day, he was magical. On a bad day, it was disastrous, right? And what was interesting about him was sort of the irony of like for his clients and his friends, he was this brilliant advisor and support, and for the kids and the family, completely different story. And as a boss, and it was difficult. I think the business suffered a lot because of his volatility. I mean, we lost a lot of talent along the way, right? This was back in the day where you did scream and yell at people. It wasn't about leadership, it was about management. Um, and the business probably didn't grow as much as it should have during his sort of reign. Anyway,
mm,
in 2011, he got diagnosed with cancer and had to go off for treatment. And I said to him, I said, "Look, let me run the company for you. I'll step into your role." And at that point, by the way, I had started a separate division to the business. It was technology training, and at the time, we were representing Apple for all of their software training. So, Apple outsourced and licensed companies like me to deliver their training for software, video editing, photography, audio, IT. And I remember this, I was like, man, I know how to sell training, package it, put it together, and let's rock and roll. And that side of the business grew very fast, and in fact outgrew the leadership side of the business. So when he went off for his treatment, I stepped into his role, and I was sort of running both companies. And the finances of the company were not good, right? It was one of those typical sort of entrepreneurial stories, which was whatever came in was going out faster than it came in because some mistakes entrepreneurs make is they use their businesses as piggy banks, right? They run all their hobbies and their toys and their golf memberships and their expenses through it. And that's kind of what was happening. So at the time I hired a coach to come in and like teach me P&L and finance and strategy and, just help me get organized. And he came back and we ended up in a massive, massive fight because he walked in and obviously hadn't been in around, probably didn't like what he saw in the finances, which for the audience, I had improved the finances tremendously over the 6 months. But he blamed me, right? And he said to me, I'll never forget, he's like, you fucked up my business. And I'm like, whoa, hold on a second here. I'm like, take it easy there, big guy. Like I've actually sort of fixed the holes in the boat right now. And you're probably not liking the decisions I made because a lot of them affect you and how you're using this business. Anyway, massive fight, like almost physical. And I quit that day. I said, I'm done. I'm done working for you. I'm done putting up with this. I've seen this for years. I've had to run interference for you with clients, with staff. I was always the one sort of picking up the mess and fixing it, right? And it was unfortunate for a guy that was so brilliant. Unfortunately, he was quite tortured and again a volatile personality, and therefore couldn't get out of his own way. So, I've seen a lot of leaders along the way, those sort of old school tyrant type of leaders, and he was one of them. And listen, that'll work for a certain amount of time,
Sure.
right? I think the danger is when you lead through fear and everyone's on eggshells, right? What ends up happening is you end up with really shitty people around you, and people don't bring you things. And the truest definition of leadership is you set other people up for success and you give them all the resources to outperform, right? And that requires vulnerability, and that requires humility. And that was things that he didn't really operate well with. So yeah. Anyway,
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm assuming you probably have seen other people that might mirror that along the way. Probably like it uniquely qualifies you for some of these I don't know what we would call these, like these bad performers under stress. You have a tool that actually helps people to identify what that is. And I know you've run that up against people who self-report versus what's actually true about what they do under stress. Like what do you find is the gap, for executives?
So you mentioned stress. So let's kind of start with that, right? As human beings, we are operating in stress. And stress could actually be good because stress gets us to move. It gets us to maybe make it a little bit of a different decision. It can sort of move us into a place of discomfort where we want to take action. But prolonged stress is super unhealthy, right? And one of the ways the human being operates or deals with stress is through internalization. It becomes what we call unexpressed emotion or unexpressed stress, right? I always like to give the analogy of stubbing your toe, right? So here's what happens, right? You stub your toe, and if you notice what we do physically is the first thing we do is we inhale and we hold our breath. Like we stub the toe and we're like, right? Everything goes tight. The sphincter goes tight, the body goes tight, the face goes tight, everything goes tight, right? The second thing you want to do is then kill the furniture, right? And the third thing you want, and the third thing you do is then you blame the furniture, right? You're like this stupid drawer, right? And if you think about if we do that with furniture, we're probably doing that in our marriages. We're doing that with our children as parents. We're doing that with our teams, right? It's very easy to blame, and the reason we want to blame is because there's this discharging of that stress, right? What goes in must come out, right? So I think what tends to happen with people is because they're internalized, they don't recognize where this is happening in their personality. So one of my frameworks and the tools is we help people understand what their personality is, right? And
Okay.
not the colors assessments and the birds assessments and like I'm a parrot and I'm creative and you're an owl and you're wise. Like these are what we call preference-based assessments. I like to describe them
Okay.
like astrology, right? So in fact, I was on TikTok the other day and my astrology popped up. It says, as a Sagittarius, you are going to be super successful over the next month and you are going to find happiness and
And
this and
look,
this
you're
and
right
this
here on
and
the
this.
podcast, so it was true.
Exactly,
Like,
exactly. And
obviously.
I'm like, fantastic. I believe it, right? But when we look at our assessment, it actually helps us understand the framework for our personality, the blueprint for our personality. Why do we act and behave and feel the way we do? Where did we develop these habits from, right? What is the structure to the personality, which we can get into if you want. And the more we understand that, the more we can start to take charge and ownership and responsibility from a place of owning our dysfunction, taking responsibility for our dysfunction. I think the failure with a lot of assessments is they speak to the positive aspects of a personality. They're like, oh, you're analytical and this is where you're going to thrive, right? My belief is self-awareness, which is actually the first pillar of emotional intelligence, uh, requires us to take ownership and insight for where my personality is dysfunctional, right? And one of the things we can appreciate about behavior and personalities is never linear. It's a spectrum, right? There's sort of a low, medium, and high. And regardless of where we sit within that spectrum, um, doesn't now start to speak about capability. It speaks about how much energy and effort it takes me to start to utilize or manage that side of my personality, because we all have a
Okay.
starting point. So here's some simple terminology. One of the sides of our personality is called the child, right? And what I love about this model is the simplistic language that it uses, right? So our child state of our personality is our emotional side of our personality. It's where all emotion is hosted, right? All
Okay.
emotion comes from the child state of your personality. And when we look at the child state of our personality, it's divided into three separate areas. The first is what we call the spontaneous child. In fact, we might acknowledge me and you on this podcast chatting away. We're both in sort of spontaneous child mode. In fact, even before we started recording, we were sort of chatting and laughing and socializing and fiddling with microphones and trying to fix the audio and, you know, kind of being light and energetic and optimistic, right? This side of our personality is usually the first side of our personality we present to people, right? Because when I'm stressed or when I'm dealing with conflict or when I'm dealing with a stranger, usually the usual thing I do is I kind of approach it in a friendly, sort of jovial, smiling way. You know, let's think about leaders, right? So leaders need to go give performance feedback, right? You're messing up on the job, you're not doing so well. So how do they do that? Like, hey, so, you know, by the way, and like, you know, I think you're great. And like, you
Okay.
know, we smile at people, right?
Mhm.
But it becomes a way we tend to cope in conflict situations. The next two states of our child personality is what's called the withdrawn child and the angry child. Now, the withdrawn child was what we were talking about before. That's the internalized function of our personality. So the withdrawn child contributes to us withdrawing, internalizing, avoiding. In fact, I believe we have a massive withdrawn child epidemic, right? You got the younger generations that are sitting
Oh.
in their rooms for 23 hours a day filming TikTok videos, but they can't pick up a phone and they can't engage with another human being, right? We see people
Mhm.
sitting in a restaurant, right? Family time, friends, everyone's staring at their phones, right? Back to Costa Rica, what I love about Costa Rica, none of us are on our phones here. We're always outside, right? You're looking at people in the
Well, they
eye,
don't
right?
work. I'm kidding.
Yeah, we're being spontaneous childs. But here's what's interesting about that, again, that withdrawn child. It's a survival and a self-preservation mechanism, right? It's now we're not having to run away from tigers anymore. But what do we need to survive as leaders? We need to survive our leadership brand. We need to self-preserve our reputation, right? We need to survive the tough conversation. And one of the ways we tend to survive is through that flight, right? Now, the withdrawn child side of our personality also gives a lot of positive aspects because, as I described before, all personality is a spectrum. It's never just this. So, the positive aspects of this is where we could operate with reflection and insight. This is where I can pause. We'll talk about the half second before. I can hold a little bit of
I want
space.
to go
Right?
there. We're definitely going there in a
All
second.
right.
Yes.
And then finally, we have the angry child. And the angry child is very simple: our anger, our temper, our frustration. Now, there's three categories to your personality, or three sections. We call these ego states. So we've spoken about the child. The opposites of this is what we call the parent, right? And leadership is a very parental type of function because the purpose of the parental side of your personality is to guide, right? So when we think about leadership, when we think about parenting, we're guiding all day. We're guiding in leadership, we're guiding execution and task and performance and deliverables. And as parents, we're guiding growth and development and decision. And, it's not too far off. Now, the way we guide is through two very distinct parental profiles. First is what's called the critical parent, right? This is the dominant side to my personality. In fact, my wife called me a critical parent the other day when I criticized the plastic cup she bought for the open house that we had yesterday, right? Which was not a compliment, by the way. She wasn't going, "Oh, dear husband, your directness, your firmness, and your assertiveness is so healthy right now," because my critical parent was out of control the other day, right? And then the opposite to this is what we call the nurturing parent, right? Which is the kind, compassionate. And in fact, this is what leaders are pushed to be today, right? They want leaders to be a nurturing parent. They want them to coach and mentor and support and look after culture and be compassionate and understanding, which is great for the human side. Unfortunately, business doesn't operate that. Business operates through the critical parent.
Through
Deliverable,
standards. Yeah.
execution, standards, performance, boundaries, right? And this is where there's that oxymoron, right? And in fact, I've had many clients actually where they've been rewarded for being the critical parent when the project is offside, or the client is offside, or revenue's offside. And then once that gets back on, they go to that same leader and they say, "Oh, by the way, now we need you to be the nurturing parent." And that poor human being is now confused. Like, what do you want from me? Right?
Interesting.
And what anchors us in the middle is what we call the adult. Now, for the Star Trek fans, all right, this is the Spock. This is the data. This is the rational, logical thinking state to your personality. Now, very simply, what we need to appreciate, specifically as leaders and as parents and spouses, is we have to operate through the adult all day. And it's like a gas tank. It depletes, 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 depletes. And when I run out of my adult fuel, right, what am I left with? Child. And here's what's interesting about the child state. When we are facing challenge and stress, it is the child state of my personality that engages first, because we are feeling creatures that think. We are not thinking creatures that feel, right? And you get home, significant other says, "Hey, what do you want to do for dinner?" And you explode because you go, "I just can't make one more decision or think about one more thing." Right?
Wow.
So that whole model, and by the way, what I've just shared with you is a very deep sort of concept, but like I've tried to sort of do it in quick succession where we could sort of use that terminology.
Yeah. I want to unfold some of that. But I love the we're gonna just say LLAP, right? Live long and
There we go.
prosper
Yeah.
moment. But brilliant the way that that's put together, and really totally explains. And I was on a couple of days ago with someone who they got a major traffic accident and ended up having chronic like high intense pain. And it's almost like it's interesting what happens when your bandwidth is full of other things, and it can be a
Right.
distraction or noise or pain or all of this stress that has come from, as you mentioned, being the adult.
Yeah.
What's the middle
The
one? The
adult.
adult, right?
Yeah.
Right. So being the adult, the drain that goes down, and then what's left is it's not the best you. You're basically
Yeah.
setting yourself up for I don't want to say gaps in performance, but you mentioned something. You changed the name of your upcoming book
Yeah.
into the half second. Can you talk to us about the half second? Because I think we can
Sure.
all, even if we're getting depleted, we can all benefit from the half second. Talk to us about it.
Yeah. So the original floating title of the book was called The Blame Game. Right? And it's kind of a lot of what we're talking about. Like as human beings, we deplete from the adult, we fill up with the withdrawn child. I like to think about the withdrawn child as the one that loads the gun, right? And we're full, 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 full. And then all of a sudden the angry child pulls the trigger and whack, right? And if anyone knows anything about shooting, right? Once the bullet leaves the gun, there is no recalling it, right? Now, if you've done anything like firearms safety training, one of the first things they teach you is how to hold the gun, which is do not put the finger on the trigger until we are lined up, aimed, focused on the target, and ready to shoot, right? And what's interesting about that sort of analogy is when we hear the bang, right, the bang actually comes way after the bullet sort of left, right? And that's kind of what happens to us when it comes down to communication and leadership, right? Is we get so full and we're walking around with our finger on the trigger, and it just takes that one little email, that knock on the door, the situation of bad news, and whack comes out the bullet. Now we're changing the name of the book to the half second, because the half second is where we go from success, or we go from being unsuccessful to successful. It is the difference between whether I go right or left. And Viktor E. Frankl talked about this, which is, and I'm going to butcher the line, but it says something along the lines of there's a space between what comes out of their mouth and yours. And if you could own that space just a little bit, you might be able to move from reaction to response.
Ooh.
And this is one of the emotional management tools that I teach, called the STOP concept. It's a super simple concept. It's not rocket science. And one of the things we've tried to do as a training company and a coaching company is take very complicated stuff and make it simple, because people will use the simple stuff, right? Some of us like to sort of think that the complicated stuff is better, but it's not. It's exactly what we've just described as complicated. So the half second, right, is the difference between whether I'm able to manage the situation more effectively or react to that situation more effectively. And I was talking about my wife earlier. So we had this open house, which was yesterday, very successful. Hey, by the way, to the audience, if anyone wants to buy a house in Costa Rica, shameless plug, call me, right?
Come get it.
But we've just finished this investment property.
I want a finder's fee if that happens.
We just finished this investment property, and we had the open house, and we're sort of getting organized. And my wife said, "Listen, I'll go grab the alcohol and I'll get the plastic cups." And I said, "Listen, please, just get the nice plastic cups, all right? Let's not get the shitty ones. This is not a 5-year-old birthday party, all right? This is for adults, and we want to have a little bit of, fanciness." Anyway, I am all week. I'm tired, right? I've been working. I've just come back from traveling. I've been getting the house organized. I've been sending out invites. I'm dealing with the real estate agents. I'm full, right? And my wife comes in on Monday and she says, "Hey, here's the cups," right? And I took one look at these cups and I was like, "Fuck." Right? And whack, right out of me came the wicked critical parent, right? The cups are no good. These are not the cups we wanted. The plastic isn't hard enough, blah, 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 blah. Now, my lovely wife didn't now look at me and go, "Dear husband, thank you for helping correct and create insights on what type of cups." And
So
she understands my training model. So she's like, "You know what? You're just being an effing critical parent," and blah, 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 blah. And here's what's interesting about the critical parent side of our personality. In the moment of heat and stress, the critical parent is not looking for solution. It is looking to find fault. And the favorite question for the critical parent, which is the worst question to ask another human being, is why. Because why is accusatory of and is blaming, and will never seek the solution. It will always force the other person into defending or justifying their decision. Now, we know from a psychological standpoint, what and how are way more facilitative. Now, let's just go back to the half second. All it would have taken for me is half a second to go, "Hold on a second. These are cups. I mean, how easy can this be fixed?" Right? This wasn't the car accident and a major trauma. This is plastic cups. The store's 30 seconds down the road, right? The plastic cups are cheap, right? It's not going to bankrupt us to go buy more cups. And here's the worst part about that. I ended up looking at the cups afterwards. I was like, actually, no, these are actually decent cups. Right? But if I took half a second, now, just for closing that gap, stress, I said the child ego state is the one that engages. So what was my child ego state engaged in the moment? My angry child. I'm frustrated. I'm built up. And then that blended with the critical parent side of my personality that did the communication. And you asked me earlier, you said, "Who's that leader that you've sort of seen mess up the most?" And I said, "My father." What was my father's personality? He was the token angry child critical parent.
Mm.
right? Now, on a good day, that angry child critical parent, it's a warrior, right? A professional athlete. It'll push through,
Mhm.
it'll grind, it'll fight, it'll do, right? But we're not in war right now, right? Leadership isn't about war. Sometimes it feels like that. And this is what also drives us as human beings. We operate with perceptions, and our perceptions are driven through our emotions, and our emotions come with experiences. And those experiences leave emotional markers. So when I'm facing these things in the future, my brain goes zoom and goes right back to that at a very unconscious state. And the one thing
For
that's
sure.
missing in all of this recipe is the adult. And it is the adult side of our personality that gives us the half second.
That's so good. That extra skip the beat, take the breath, say a prayer, whatever it is you can do in that half
Yeah.
second. It's
Yeah.
better than you just jumping. I'm curious because you talk about like obviously this all goes into the personal, right? Who you mentioned in your home, but you do this with
Right.
CEOs. And I'm just curious
Yeah.
if you could walk me through the moment that you're telling a CEO that their behavior is the liability. Like
Yeah.
what happens in that room?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I can't tell you how many times I get a phone call from like, the head of people and culture or whatnot, and clients that I've worked with for years, and they'll say, listen, the CEO needs a little bit of Greg Witz feedback, which is very simply put, like no one else has said this to the CEO. No one else has like helped them understand. Everyone is too gun shy to bring
Mhm.
up the feedback. Now, feedback is one of the most important things we can take. I mean, look at a professional athlete. They get feedback all the time, that feedback loop, right? It's not about good or bad feedback. And I often say this to people. We often try to approach feedback from a place of this is positive feedback or negative feedback. And I'm like, we need to stop saying it's positive or negative.
Right.
Feedback needs to be neutral, right? So I think in my experience, 99% of the time, like I can't think of one CEO or executive that has ever had a problem with the coaching that I've done with them. Um, is it's appreciated, right? Most people want that feedback because majority of people wake up in the morning and they want to perform. They want to
Mm.
meet that sort of bar of excellence. And it is unfair for us as team members, as colleagues, as peers, right, to not be able to provide that insight. And feedback is just information. Again, it's neutral. It's just information. So I tend to also be a strong critical parent angry child. So when a client says, hey, we need you to go work with that CEO, and they need a little bit of Greg with sort of feedback, right? Let's hit the nail on the head. And what helps us is the assessment, right? So it's not just my opinion and what people have said. The assessment is a 360. So there's a self component and there's an others component.
Oh,
And
nice.
it
Yeah.
is really eye-opening to people, specifically when we start to use the terminology of ego states, angry child, critical parent, nurturing parent, right? So at this point, it's not like you're a nice person or a bad person. It's like, look, this is where your critical parent serves you as a leader. This is where it is very disruptive to other people. It's not about
Mhm.
not being the critical parent. It's not about not being that angry child. It's about the volume control,
Mm.
right? And I keep reminding people behavior is a spectrum. Regardless of where I sit in the assessment, doesn't acknowledge my capability to be or not be. What it actually acknowledges is how much energy and effort it takes me to use
Oh,
that
yeah.
or not use that, right? And when you give people definition of the ego states and the terminology, now all of a sudden behavior becomes tangible. See, if I go to a CEO before and I say, "Listen, bud, you tend to be a little hard with people, and you're too direct, and you need to be softer, and you need to be a little more collaborative." Well, I understand all of these words, but what the f does that mean? But when I
Right.
go, "Hey, listen, when speaking with Donnie, your critical parent was like through the roof, and your critical parent started pounding on Donnie, right? And your critical parent didn't leave any room for Donnie to respond and communicate." That leader goes, "Oh shit, yeah, I know exactly what that means." Right?
Yeah. I like that too because I will say like giving it a label and having a common language to talk about something with, it removes, I think, some of the defensiveness that I've seen in leaders when you do have those crucial conversations, crucial conflicts.
Yeah,
That-
yeah. It's the biggest feedback we get, which is this whole concept of ego states has created a lexicon to depersonalize the conversation. I
100%.
can go to my leader and say, listen, can we tone down on the angry child? Because I need you to be the adult in this
Right.
conversation.
You're not
Fuck,
saying
I
you're
can do
being an
that all
a-hole.
day.
You don't have to
Exactly.
see, yeah, you're giving
Yeah,
it a label that's neither positive nor negative. I like how
yeah,
you neutralize feedback. So
yeah.
you've been so generous with your time. This has been so rich for people that are looking. I think we got even more than we thought we would have gotten in
Mhm.
hopefully becoming better humans. I'm going to leave it with this question, Greg, and you're like, if you can bring it home here and tell us where we can find you. And I think we may have some, I don't know if we have any promo thing that we can throw up here in a second, but I want to know this. I'm imagining someone listening to this, they may be suspecting that they're the leader with a problem, right? They're
Mhm.
the problem that's in the room, or maybe they have one. Maybe they have
Yeah.
like this person that is like so unaware. And obviously, pick up the red phone and call Greg Witz is the answer. But what's one precise thing that they could do this week that would improve things? And then tell us where
Okay.
we can
So,
find you.
all right. So one precise thing, and I'm actually going to sort of go a little high level here. So we could practice being more emotionally intelligent, and there's three ways for you to do that. Number one, self-awareness, right? So for the leader that might be listening, thinking, "Hey, maybe I'm the problem." Awesome, good for you, right? If it's someone they've got, right? But self-awareness, really understanding why I operate and behave and think and feel and behave and communicate the way I do, right? Number two, right? Self-management. That's the second aspect of emotional intelligence. I have domain over myself.
Mm,
I have domain and control of my emotions, my heat, my feelings, my percent. I This is not mystical. It's not something in the universe that I need to imagine, right? I can operate with the half second. And how do we self-manage, ladies and gentlemen? Half second. Just take a half second. And what's interesting is your frontal lobe will start to engage. And third, what we call relational management, right? Can you deal with other people more effectively? If we could practice those three things this week, right? I promise you, you're going to be way more effective as a leader. You're going to be a better parent and you're going to be a better spouse.
Greg
Now, where
Witz,
could
let's
people find
call the
me?
thunder. Yeah, where can we find you, man?
Yeah. So website is sort of the place. So Witz Education, WITZ education.com. I'm all over social as well. So Greg Witz, if you're on Instagram, if you're on TikTok, if you're on Facebook, if you're on LinkedIn, come and join. I post content. We were posting content every day. I've kind of gotten a little lazy with it recently, but the idea is all around what could we share out there, including this podcast, for audiences to learn. So come join me on social, check out the website, and all my details and phone numbers are on the website as well.
Let's go. Thanks for bringing the thunder, my friend. And guys, Greg Witz just helped you to lead better. If you can lead better, you can live better. And I for one am going to take that half second. It's not a luxury. Stop treating it like that. It might just save your business, your family, or even your life. Thank you, Greg Witz.
Thank you, Donnie.
Coming up next week, the king of sales, Jeffrey Gittimer. He's going to be talking about what in the heck is going on with AI and leadership and selling, and you won't want to miss this. It's going to be fire, y'all. So show up there. This has been Leadership Live, brought to you by Fuel. You can find Greg Witz on the Fuel platform as well. Actually, we'll put a link in for that. Find myself on there as well as over 100 other leaders who will give you and bring you through a master class on how to be better at everything: life, love, living, business, everything. So thank you, Fuel, for making this possible and producing the show for us. Guys, that's it for now. Keep winning on Wednesday.